My sister lied and got me disowned for staying friends with her ex. Now she wants me to fund her big day. But I showed her what real karma looks like. I used to think blood was thicker than water, until my own family chose pride over justice and taught me that loyalty has nothing to do with shared DNA. My name is Amelia Johnson and I'm 31 years old. 7 years ago, my family disowned me for refusing to abandon someone who had been wronged. Today they came crawling back, expecting me to fund their dreams after years of silence. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was 24, fresh out of business school and working my way up in a tech startup. My younger sister Tiffany was 24 too, though you'd never guess we were related by how differently we approached life. Where I was methodical and hardworking, Tiffany was impulsive and lived for the moment. She was dating Marcus Chen, a genuinely sweet guy who worked as a graphic designer and treated her like absolute royalty. Marcus was the kind of person who remembered Tiffany's favorite coffee order, who drove across town to get her favorite pastries when she was stressed, who listened to her complain about work for hours without ever getting bored. He wasn't wealthy, but he was dependable, kind, and completely devoted to my sister. I liked him immediately. He felt like the older brother I never had, someone who actually cared about our family's well-being. But Tiffany had bigger dreams. She'd started her Instagram account around that time, posting beauty and lifestyle content, and was gaining followers rapidly. The attention went straight to her head. She began meeting other influencers at events, networking with photographers and brand managers, and slowly, her priorities shifted. Marcus, with his steady but modest income, started to seem less appealing compared to the flashy guys she was meeting in her new circles. The beginning of the end came when Tiffany met Derek Thornton at a brand launch party. Derek was everything Marcus wasn't: wealthy, connected, and willing to throw money around to impress people. He drove a Tesla, lived in a penthouse apartment, and promised Tiffany collaborations with major beauty brands. Within 2 weeks of meeting him, she was cheating on Marcus, though she hid it masterfully. I started noticing the signs before anyone else did. Tiffany would claim she was having girls' nights but post stories from expensive restaurants I knew she couldn't afford. She'd receive designer packages and claim they were gifted by brands, but I recognized them as items Derek had been posting about on his own social media. When Marcus would call during family dinners, she'd step outside to take the call, her voice strained and guilty. The confrontation I'd been dreading came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. Marcus showed up at our family's house, completely devastated, holding his phone with shaking hands. He'd discovered Tiffany's relationship with Derek through a mutual friend who'd seen them together at a high-end club downtown. The photos were unmistakable: my sister and Derek holding hands, kissing, completely absorbed in each other. "I don't understand," Marcus kept saying, his voice breaking. "We were talking about moving in together. She said she loved me. We had plans for Thanksgiving with both our families." Instead of owning up to her betrayal, Tiffany chose the nuclear option. She denied everything at first, then when the evidence became impossible to ignore, she flipped the script entirely. Suddenly, Marcus was controlling and possessive. She claimed he was holding her back from her career opportunities, and that she'd been trying to find a way to break up with him gently. The most disgusting part was watching her rewrite history in real time. According to Tiffany's new narrative, Marcus had never really supported her dreams, had been jealous of her success, and had been emotionally manipulative throughout their relationship. It was complete fiction, and everyone in our family knew it, but nobody called her out. When Marcus came to me for support, I didn't hesitate. I'd watched him be nothing but loving and supportive to my sister for 18 months. I'd seen him celebrate every milestone in her career, help her set up equipment for photo shoots, and even connect her with potential collaboration opportunities through his design network. The idea that he was anything other than devoted was laughable. I started meeting Marcus for coffee regularly, helping him process the betrayal and rebuild his confidence. He was genuinely broken by what Tiffany had done, not just because she'd cheated, but because of how she'd tried to destroy his character to justify her actions. He'd trusted her completely and couldn't understand how someone he loved could be so cruel. These coffee meetings became a lifeline for both of us. Marcus was dealing with heartbreak, while I was struggling with my own career challenges and family dynamics. We developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. He was ambitious, ethical, and had a work ethic that reminded me of myself. When he started freelancing and building his own design business, I helped him with business strategy and marketing. When I was stressed about my startup, he'd listen without judgment and offer surprisingly insightful advice. But Tiffany saw our friendship as a personal betrayal. 3 months after the breakup, when she discovered I was still in regular contact with Marcus, she exploded. I came home from work one evening to find her waiting in the living room with our parents, her face red with fury. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed before I'd even put down my purse. "How could you choose him over your own sister?" I was genuinely confused. Choose him how? We're friends, Tiffany. He's a good person who got hurt, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make you feel better about what you did. What I did. I ended a relationship that wasn't working. People break up, Amelia, that's normal. But sisters don't abandon their family for some random guy. He's not some random guy. He was your boyfriend for a year and a half, and he cared about you more than anyone you'll probably ever meet again. The fact that you can't see that says everything about your character. The argument escalated quickly. Tiffany accused me of always having feelings for Marcus and waiting for my chance to steal him. When I pointed out how ridiculous that was, Marcus and I had never been anything other than friends, she claimed I was emotionally cheating with him and destroying her ability to move on. Our parents, who should have shut down this nonsense immediately, instead chose to enable Tiffany's victim narrative. They'd always babied her, always made excuses for her behavior, and this situation was no different. Within an hour, the conversation had shifted from Tiffany's betrayal of Marcus to my alleged betrayal of family loyalty. "Amelia," my father said in his most serious voice, "Tiffany is your sister. She needs your support right now, not your judgment. This Marcus situation needs to end." "What Marcus situation? Our friendship? Since when do you get to choose my friends?" "Since your friendship is hurting your sister and disrupting this family," my mother chimed in. "Tiffany feels like she can't move forward with Marcus still in the picture through you. That's not my problem to solve. If Tiffany feels guilty about how she treated Marcus, maybe she should apologize to him instead of demanding that I cut contact with a good friend." The ultimatum came the next morning. My parents sat me down at breakfast and laid out their terms: cut all contact with Marcus, or lose their financial and emotional support. They'd been helping me with rent while I got established in my career, and they made it clear that assistance would disappear if I didn't comply. "This is insane," I said, staring at them in disbelief. "You're essentially asking me to punish an innocent person to protect Tiffany from the consequences of her own actions." "We're asking you to prioritize your family," my father replied. "Marcus isn't family. Tiffany is. The choice should be obvious." But it was obvious, just not in the way they expected. I looked at my parents, two people who were willing to enable dishonesty and cruelty to avoid dealing with their younger daughter's character flaws, and realized I didn't want their support if it came with these kinds of strings attached. "Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss," I said, standing up from the breakfast table. "I'm not going to abandon a friend to make a liar feel better about herself." The next few weeks were brutal. My parents followed through on their threat, cutting off all financial support immediately. I had to find a cheaper apartment, take on freelance work to make ends with my startup salary, and navigate the emotional devastation of being rejected by my own family. Tiffany blocked me on all social media and convinced most of our extended family that I'd chosen some guy over blood. But Marcus was incredible during this period. When he found out what had happened, he was horrified that his situation had caused problems between me and my family. He offered to step back from our friendship if it would help me reconcile with them, which only proved to me that I'd chosen the right side. His immediate instinct was to sacrifice his own needs to protect me from consequences, which was exactly the opposite of what Tiffany had done to him. "Absolutely not," I told him when he suggested disappearing from my life. "If my family can't handle me being friends with a good person, that's their problem, not ours." The next 7 years were a masterclass in personal growth and success without family support. I threw myself into my career with the intensity I hadn't known I possessed. Without the safety net of parental assistance, failure wasn't an option. I worked 80-hour weeks, took on every challenging project I could find, and slowly built a reputation as someone who could solve impossible problems. Marcus and I supported each other through everything. When I was ready to launch my own company 3 years later, he designed all my branding and marketing materials. When he decided to expand into web development and needed business advice, I helped him write his business plan and connect with potential clients. We became the family we'd chosen for ourselves, celebrating each other's victories and providing support during setbacks. Meanwhile, Tiffany's life followed a predictable pattern of shallow relationships and financial irresponsibility. Her Instagram following grew steadily, but she never developed the business acumen to monetize it effectively. She'd cycle through wealthy boyfriends, enjoy lavish lifestyles while the relationships lasted, then move back in with our parents when things inevitably fell apart. Each breakup was dramatic and public, often involving accusations and social media meltdowns that damaged her professional reputation. Derek, the guy she'd cheated with, lasted about 8 months before moving on to someone newer and more exciting. After that came a series of increasingly problematic relationships with men who saw her as arm candy rather than a partner. She seemed incapable of learning from her mistakes, always blaming her exes for not understanding her ambitions rather than examining her own behavior patterns. My parents enabled every bit of it. They never held Tiffany accountable for her choices, instead treating each new crisis as something that was happening to her, rather than something she was creating. They'd call extended family members asking for loan assistance when Tiffany's spending spiraled out of control, always framing it as helping their daughter through a rough patch rather than acknowledging the pattern of irresponsibility. During these 7 years, I received exactly 3 communications from my family. The first was a formal invitation to Tiffany's 26th birthday party, which I suspected was sent by mistake. The second was a Christmas card, with a generic message that felt more like an obligation than genuine sentiment. The third was a brief email from my mother, letting me know my grandmother had passed away, with details about the funeral that made it clear my attendance would be complicated for family dynamics. I grieved my grandmother's death alone, with only Marcus for support. She'd been the one family member who'd always believed in me, who'd encouraged my ambitions and celebrated my achievements. The fact that I couldn't even attend her funeral without causing family drama was a fresh wound that took months to heal. But these experiences taught me something valuable about chosen family versus biological family. Marcus was at my apartment within an hour of receiving my grandmother's death news, bringing comfort food and staying up all night listening to my favorite memories of her. He helped me create a private memorial service where I could grieve without family politics interfering. That night, I realized I'd gained something far more valuable than what I'd lost. My business continued growing steadily. By year 5, I was running a team of 12 people and handling consulting contracts for major tech companies. By year 7, I was being invited to speak at industry conferences and had been featured in several business publications as a rising star in tech entrepreneurship. Marcus had built his own successful agency, and we'd started collaborating on projects that combined his creative skills with my strategic expertise. The success felt even sweeter because it was entirely self-made. Every achievement was earned through my own effort, without family connections or financial assistance. I'd proven to myself that I could build the life I wanted without compromising my values or abandoning people who deserved my loyalty. Then, 3 weeks ago, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother's voice was tentative, almost apologetic, as she asked if we could talk. "Amelia, sweetheart, I know it's been a long time, but I was hoping we could reconnect. Tiffany is getting married, and we're all hoping you'll be part of the celebration." The audacity was breathtaking. 7 years of silence, 7 years of treating me like I didn't exist. And now they wanted to reconnect because they needed something from me. "Congratulations to Tiffany," I said carefully. "I hope she's found someone who makes her happy." "She has. His name is Jonathan Westbrook, and he's wonderful. He owns several restaurants downtown and treats her like a princess. They're planning a beautiful wedding for next spring." I waited for her to get to the real point of the call. "The thing is," my mother continued, her voice getting nervous, "weddings are so expensive these days. And Jonathan's been having some cash flow issues with his businesses. Nothing serious, just some temporary setbacks from the pandemic effects on the restaurant industry. We were wondering if you might be able to help with some of the wedding costs." There it was. After 7 years of radio silence, they'd called because they needed money. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, genuinely curious about the scope of their expectations. "Well, Tiffany has her heart set on this gorgeous venue, and the photographer she wants is quite expensive. We're looking at maybe $30,000 for the major expenses. $30,000. They wanted me to spend $30,000 on a wedding for the sister who'd tried to destroy my reputation, facilitated by parents who'd disowned me for refusing to abandon a friend. Mom, I said slowly. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're calling me after 7 years of no contact to ask for $30,000 for Tiffany's wedding? We know it's a lot to ask, but you've done so well for yourself. And family is family, you know? Tiffany really wants you to be her maid of honor. She's grown up so much, and she realizes how important family is now. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost impressive. They weren't asking me to reconcile because they missed me or regretted their treatment of me. They were offering me the privilege of paying for their acceptance. I'll need to think about it, I said, buying myself time to process the situation. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll text you Tiffany's number so you two can reconnect directly. That evening I told Marcus about the call. He listened without interruption, his expression growing more incredulous with each detail. $30,000, he repeated when I finished. They want you to pay $30,000 to be welcomed back into a family that disowned you for being my friend. It gets better. Tiffany wants me to be her maid of honor. Marcus actually laughed at that. The same Tiffany who told everyone you were trying to steal her boyfriend? The one who convinced your parents to cut you off financially? She wants you to be her maid of honor? Apparently she's grown up and realizes how important family is now. Right. And I'm sure this realization has nothing to do with needing money for her dream wedding. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the absurdity of the situation. Finally, Marcus spoke again. You know what the really sick part is? If they'd reached out years ago with a genuine apology, if they'd acknowledged how wrong they were and asked for a real relationship with you, you probably would have helped them. He was right. Despite everything, I'd always harbored a small hope that my family would eventually come to their senses. If they'd approached me with humility and genuine remorse, I would have been open to reconciliation. But this transactional approach to family relationships revealed that they still hadn't learned anything. 2 days later, Tiffany called me directly. Her voice was saccharine sweet, full of fake emotion and practiced vulnerability. Amelia, oh my God, it's so good to hear your voice. I've missed you so much. Mom told me you two talked about the wedding. She mentioned it, yes. I really hope you'll say yes to being my maid of honor. I know things were complicated between us before, but that was so long ago and we were both so young. I've learned so much about what really matters in life. What have you learned? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Well, you know, about family and loyalty and how important it is to support each other through everything. That's interesting. What changed your perspective? Just growing up, I guess. Realizing that blood is thicker than water and all that. The irony of her using that phrase was perfect. She had no idea she was essentially repeating the same logic that had been used to cut me out of the family 7 years earlier. And what about Marcus? I asked, curious to see how she'd handle that topic. Marcus? Oh, well, that's ancient history. I barely even remember what that whole thing was about. Something silly, I'm sure. Young people's drama, you know? She was rewriting history again, just like she had 7 years ago. The complete destruction of an innocent person's trust and reputation was now just young people's drama that she barely remembered. Tiffany, I said, my voice getting colder. Marcus and I are still friends. In fact, we're business partners now. So before you continue minimizing what you did to him, you should know that I remember exactly what happened and why it mattered. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for almost 30 seconds. Right, she finally said, her voice losing some of its artificial warmth. Well, like I said, that was a long time ago. I'm sure we can all move past it. I have moved past it. The question is whether you've grown enough as a person to take responsibility for your actions instead of pretending they didn't matter. Look, I don't want to get into ancient history right now. This is supposed to be about my wedding, about bringing the family back together. No, Tiffany. This is about you needing money and suddenly remembering you have a sister. The mask slipped completely at that point. Look, are you going to help us or not? Because if you're not, I need to know so I can make other arrangements. There was the real Tiffany. No more fake emotion, no more manipulation, just the transactional relationship she'd always wanted with me. I'll let you know, I said, and hung up. That night, Marcus and I developed what we privately called Operation Karma. If my family wanted to play games, I was happy to show them what 7 years of success and financial independence could accomplish. The next morning, I called my mother back. "Mom, I've thought about Tiffany's wedding situation, and I've made my decision." "Oh, wonderful. I knew you'd come through for family when it really mattered. I'm not giving Tiffany any money for her wedding." The silence was deafening. But she's your sister, Amelia. This is her special day." "You're absolutely right. She's my sister, and this is her special day, which is exactly why she should be able to fund it herself or with the support of the family that actually chose to stay in her life." "I don't understand. You have the money. Why wouldn't you want to help?" "Because helping would require me to pretend that the last 7 years didn't happen. It would require me to accept that my family can ignore me for years and then demand my resources whenever it's convenient." My mother's voice got sharper. "We never ignored you, Amelia. We gave you space to think about your priorities." "Right. 7 years of space to think about my priorities. And you know what I learned? I learned that my real family consists of people who support me when I'm right, not people who punish me for having principles. This is ridiculous. You're holding a grudge over something that happened when you were practically children." "I'm not holding a grudge, Mom. I'm simply applying the same standards to you that you applied to me. You chose Tiffany over justice 7 years ago. I'm choosing justice over Tiffany now." The conversation devolved from there, with my mother cycling through guilt, anger, and finally threats. She implied that refusing to help would mean permanent estrangement from the family, as if that wasn't exactly what they'd already imposed on me years earlier. But I wasn't done yet. The real masterpiece came 2 days later. I called Marcus and proposed something delicious. "How would you feel about taking that European vacation we've been talking about? I'm thinking 3 weeks, hitting all the major cities, staying at the nicest hotels, documenting everything on social media. That sounds amazing, but what's the timing?" "I'm thinking we leave next week, right around the time Tiffany's engagement party is happening." Marcus grinned when he understood what I was suggesting. "You want to post pictures of us living our best life while they're scrambling to fund their wedding? I want to show them what loyalty and genuine friendship look like. I want them to see exactly what they gave up when they chose manipulation over integrity." We spent the next week planning the most photogenic vacation possible. High-end restaurants, luxury hotels, exclusive experiences, and lots of social media documentation. I made sure to post pictures that highlighted our success, our happiness, and our genuine friendship. The photos told a story without words. Marcus and me laughing over dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris, celebrating a new business contract while exploring Rome, toasting our friendship while watching the sunset from a luxury resort in Santorini. Every image was a subtle reminder that while my biological family was begging for money, my chosen family was thriving. The engagement party happened while we were in Barcelona. I didn't post anything specifically referencing it, but I did share a photo of Marcus and me at an exclusive art gallery opening, both of us dressed impeccably and obviously enjoying ourselves. The caption read, "Grateful for friends who've supported my dreams for 7 years and counting. True loyalty is priceless." The response was immediate and satisfying. Extended family members who'd heard Tiffany's version of our estrangement started reaching out privately, asking questions about the real story. Some of them had always suspected there was more to the situation than they'd been told. My cousin Rebecca called while we were in London. "Amelia, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. The whole situation with you and Tiffany 7 years ago, what really happened?" I gave her the full story, including details I'd never shared with anyone except Marcus. By the end of the conversation, Rebecca was horrified. "I can't believe Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda chose to side with Tiffany after she did something so awful. And now they're asking you to fund her wedding? The audacity is unreal. It gets better. She wants me to be her maid of honor. You're kidding me. I wish I were." Rebecca promised to have conversations with other family members, particularly our grandparents who'd always adored me, but had been fed a steady diet of Tiffany's victim narrative. Slowly, the truth began spreading through the extended family network. Meanwhile, Tiffany's wedding planning was apparently not going well. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that several vendors had backed out due to non-payment, and they'd had to downsize the venue twice. Jonathan's temporary cash flow issues were apparently more serious than they'd initially let on. 3 days before we returned from Europe, my father called me for the first time in 7 years. Amelia, we need to talk. Hello to you too, Dad. Don't be smart with me. This family is falling apart and you're parading around Europe like you don't have a care in the world. I don't have a care in the world about this family's problems, actually. I spent 7 years learning to live without your support or approval. Tiffany is heartbroken that you won't help with her wedding. She's been crying for days. That's unfortunate. Maybe she should have thought about the long-term consequences before she tried to destroy an innocent person's reputation to cover up her own cheating. That was 7 years ago. How long are you going to punish her for a mistake she made as a kid? I'm not punishing anyone, Dad. I'm simply living my life according to my own values instead of letting you dictate my choices. You know, the thing you told me I couldn't do 7 years ago. Your values? Your values include abandoning your family when they need you most? My values include loyalty, honesty, and standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Ironically, those are exactly the values that got me disowned in the first place. The conversation went in circles for another 20 minutes, with my father alternating between guilt trips and threats. Finally, he played what he thought was his trump card. Fine. If you won't help Tiffany, then don't bother coming to the wedding. In fact, don't bother coming around at all. You're not the daughter we raised. You're absolutely right, I said calmly. I'm not the daughter you raised. I'm better. I'm someone who keeps her word, who stands by her friends, and who doesn't abandon people when they're inconvenient. I'm someone who builds success through hard work instead of manipulating others for financial support. Don't you dare lecture me about— I'm not lecturing you, Dad. I'm simply pointing out that you spent 7 years teaching me to live without you. Congratulations, you succeeded. I hung up and immediately called Marcus to share the conversation. He listened quietly, then said something that perfectly captured the moment. You know what the beautiful part is? 7 years ago, they thought they were punishing you by taking away their support. Instead, they gave you the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover what you're capable of on your own. The last week of our vacation was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. I'd finally closed the door on a toxic relationship that had been weighing on me for most of my adult life. I wasn't angry anymore, I was free. We returned home to discover that Tiffany's wedding had been postponed indefinitely. According to the Family Gossip Network, Jonathan's financial problems were more serious than anyone had realized, and several major vendors had demanded payment in advance after previous clients had defaulted. But the most satisfying development was the shift in extended family dynamics. Rebecca had been busy during our absence, sharing the true story of what had happened 7 years earlier with our grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. By the time we got back, the family narrative had completely flipped. Suddenly, I was receiving calls and messages from relatives who wanted to apologize for believing Tiffany's version of events. They were horrified to learn how I'd been treated and impressed by what I'd accomplished despite the lack of family support. My grandfather called personally to express his regret. Amelia, I owe you an apology. If I'd known the real story, I would have stood up for you years ago. Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become. These conversations were healing in ways I hadn't expected. I'd spent 7 years believing that my entire extended family had rejected me, when in reality, they'd simply been fed false information by my parents and Tiffany. 3 months later, Marcus and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Tiffany. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that Jonathan and I broke up. The wedding is officially canceled. I'm moving back in with Mom and Dad while I figure out my next steps. I also wanted to say that I'm sorry for how things went between us. I know you probably won't forgive me, but I needed to say it anyway. I showed the message to Marcus. He read it twice, then looked up at me. How do you feel about that? Honestly, I feel nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no sadness, just nothing. That's probably the healthiest response possible. I never replied to Tiffany's message. There was nothing to say that wouldn't either be cruel or false, so silence seemed like the kindest option. 6 months after that, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. My cousin Rebecca was getting married and specifically requested that I be one of her bridesmaids. The invitation included a handwritten note. I know this family hasn't always appreciated you the way we should have, but I want you to know that you've always been important to me. I hope you'll help me celebrate. The wedding was beautiful, and for the first time in years I felt genuinely connected to my extended family. My parents and Tiffany were there, of course, but we maintained polite distance. they looked smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of their own choices. During the reception, my grandfather pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Amelia, I've been thinking a lot about family loyalty lately. Your grandmother used to say that real loyalty isn't about blood, it's about character. You showed more character at 24 than most people develop in a lifetime." "Thank you, Grandpa. That means everything to me. I want you to know that your inheritance from your grandmother is still intact. Your parents never had access to it, and it's been earning interest for 7 years. She always believed in you, even when the rest of us were too blind to see what was happening. That inheritance allowed Marcus and me to expand our business internationally. We opened offices in 3 major cities and developed partnerships with companies we'd only dreamed of working with. Every success felt like a tribute to my grandmother's faith in me. Today, 2 years later, my life is exactly what I always dreamed it could be. My company is thriving. My friendship with Marcus has evolved into the most supportive relationship I've ever experienced. And I've built a chosen family of people who value integrity over convenience. I still run into people occasionally who ask about my biological family, and I've learned to give a simple, honest answer. We have different values, so we live different lives. I don't harbor resentment toward my parents or Tiffany anymore. They made choices that reflected their priorities, and I made choices that reflected mine. The difference is that my choices led to growth, success, and authentic relationships, while theirs led to financial stress, family drama, and a daughter who still can't take responsibility for her actions. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen differently 7 years ago. If I'd abandoned Marcus to appease my family, would I have kept their approval? Would I have been content with their conditional love and financial support? The answer is no. I would have lost myself in the process of trying to please people who valued compliance over character. I would have learned that love could be withdrawn whenever I inconvenienced anyone, and I would have spent my life walking on eggshells to avoid triggering another ultimatum. Instead, I learned that real love doesn't come with conditions. Real loyalty doesn't require you to abandon innocent people to protect guilty ones. Real family stands by you when you're right, even when it's difficult. Marcus often jokes that Tiffany accidentally gave us the greatest gift possible when she cheated on him. She revealed everyone's true character and allowed us to build something genuine together. What was meant to tear us apart actually brought us closer and showed us what authentic partnership looks like. I've never regretted choosing justice over family approval. I've never wished I'd taken the easier path of abandoning a friend to keep the peace. And I've never doubted that the people who truly love me will support me when I'm doing the right thing, even when it costs them something. The family that matters most isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you choose, and the one that chooses you back every single day, regardless of what the world throws at you. Blood may be thicker than water, but integrity is thicker than blood, and I'd rather build my life on a foundation of principles than on a foundation of conditional acceptance. In the end, my family didn't disown me for choosing Marcus over Tiffany. They disowned me for choosing right over wrong, and that choice revealed everything I needed to know about who they really were. 7 years later, when they came crawling back for money, I simply applied the same logic they'd taught me. Sometimes you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, and the right choice isn't always the popular one. I chose right then, and I chose right again. And every day I wake up in the life I built through my own principles and effort. I'm grateful for the lesson they taught me, even if it wasn't the lesson they intended to give.